Rain fell over Chicago like the city had something to confess. It came down in silver sheets, washing the sidewalks, blurring the streetlights, turning the old stone steps of St. Agnes Church slick and dark. The neighborhood had changed over the years. The corner bakery was gone. The family-owned pharmacy had been replaced by a glass-fronted urgent care clinic. Even the old Italian grocery across the street had become a coffee shop with white walls and $8 lattes. But St. Agnes still stood, weathered, stubborn, quiet. The church bell had already rung for the evening service, and most of the parishioners had gone home with their umbrellas tucked under their arms and their collars pulled high against the rain. Only a few candles still burned near the altar, their small flames trembling whenever the front doors opened and let in the cold. Matteo Moretti stepped inside without making a sound. He wore a black wool coat over a dark suit, no tie, no unnecessary jewelry, except for the silver ring on his left hand. Two men waited outside near the curb, both dressed like ordinary drivers and neither one ordinary at all. Matteo had told them not to follow him in. He had not come to make a statement. He had not come as Matteo Moretti, head of the Moretti family, the man who controlled half the private security contracts on the South Side and enough construction unions to make city officials lower their voices when his name was mentioned. Tonight, he had come because an old man named Patrick Donnelly had died. Patrick had once helped Matteo's mother when she was young, poor, and too proud to ask for help. He had fixed their furnace one winter without charging a cent. Matteo had been 9 at the time, old enough to remember the cold, old enough to remember the shame in his mother's face, old enough to remember Patrick saying, "A boy should sleep warm, Rosa. Pride can wait until spring." Matteo never forgot debts. Not good ones, not bad ones. That was one of the reasons men feared him. He walked down the center aisle slowly, his shoes almost silent against the stone floor. The church smelled of old wood, candle wax, and rain-soaked coats. Near the altar, a framed photograph of Patrick Donnelly sat beside a small arrangement of white lilies. Matteo paused in front of it, bowed his head, and made the sign of the cross out of habit more than faith. He had not been a faithful man in a long time. Men like him usually found God only when bullets missed them by inches or doctors said words they could not threaten their way out of. Matteo had survived both. He had prayed during neither. Still, he stood there for Patrick, for his mother, for the boy he had once been. When he turned to leave, he noticed the child. She was sitting alone in the last pew on the left side of the church, small enough that her black shoes did not touch the floor. She had a purple crayon in one hand and a folded church bulletin spread open on her lap like a sketchbook. Her brown hair was tied back in a crooked ponytail, the kind a child might do herself after an adult had tried and failed during a busy morning. She should not have been there alone. Matteo glanced toward the vestibule, then toward the side door leading to the parish offices. No one came. The little girl did not seem frightened. That was the first thing he noticed. Children had instincts adults ruined over time. They knew when a man carried danger, even if they did not understand what kind. Most children looked away from Matteo. Some hid behind their mothers. A few stared too long until an adult pulled them close. This child looked at him directly, not boldly, not rudely, curiously. Matteo began walking toward the doors. He had nearly passed her pew when she spoke. "Sir?" Her voice was soft, but in the empty church it carried. Matteo stopped. He turned his head slightly. The girl was looking at his hand. At the ring, she pointed with the purple crayon. "My mom has a ring just like yours." For 1 second, Matteo did not understand the sentence. Then the words reached something buried so deep inside him that even grief had stopped touching it. "My mom has a ring just like yours." The air seemed to leave the church. Matteo turned fully toward her. "What did you say?" The child blinked, uncertain now, as if she had not expected the question to matter so much. "Your ring," she said, pointing again. "My mom has one like it. She doesn't wear it on her finger. She keeps it on a chain under her shirt." Matteo's face changed. Men who worked for him would have noticed. Men who feared him would have stepped back. His expression did not break, not exactly, but the color drained from beneath his skin. His left hand closed slowly, hiding the ring from view, as if the silver had suddenly become a wound. Only 2 rings like that existed. He knew because he had ordered them himself, 9 years ago. Before the fire, before the betrayal, before Claire. The little girl kept talking, innocent of the knife she had just placed between his ribs. She thinks I don't see it, she said. But I do. Sometimes she holds it when she says sad. Mateo took one step closer to the pew. Not too close. Something in him understood that if he frightened the child, he might lose the only honest thing that had happened to him in nearly a decade. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lily." "Lily what?" "Lily Hayes." Hayes. The name meant nothing to him. That made it worse. "How old are you, Lily?" "8." 8. Mateo felt the word move through him like a verdict. Claire had disappeared 9 years ago. The fire had taken the safe house on a wet October night. They told him she had been inside. They told him the body was damaged beyond recognition. But the bracelet, the height, the dental records, the timing, all of it pointed to her. Before that, they had told him something worse. They had told him she stole from him. They had told him she sold private financial records to the Caruso faction. They had told him she had smiled at him in bed while planning to destroy him. He believed it because grief needs someone to hate, and because Vincent Caruso had stood beside him at the ruins of that house, one hand on Mateo's shoulder, speaking in the grave voice of a man carrying truth. She fooled us all, Mateo. For 9 years, Mateo had worn the ring anyway. Not because he forgave her, because he could not cut her out without cutting away the last human part of himself. "Where is your mother now?" Mateo asked. Lily looked toward the church doors. "She's late. The bus gets bad when it rains." Father Daniel said I could wait inside after choir. As if summoned by his name, Father Daniel O'Rourke appeared from the side hallway, carrying a stack of hymn books against his chest. He was a tall man in his late 60s, thin but not fragile, with white hair and eyes that had seen too many men pretend they were not broken. He saw Mateo standing near Lily. The priest stopped, just for a moment. Then he came forward with calm steps. "Lily," Father Daniel said gently, "why don't you go get your coat from the office? I think your mother will be here soon." Lily frowned. "But I'm not done with my drawing. You can bring it with you." She looked from Father Daniel to Mateo, then back down at her bulletin. Children could feel when adults began speaking in a language made of silence. "All right," she said. She slid off the pew, gathered her crayon and paper, and walked toward the side hallway. Halfway there, she turned back to Mateo. "Do you know my mom?" Mateo could not answer. Father Daniel did it for him. "Go on, sweetheart." Lily disappeared into the hallway. The church seemed colder after she left. Mateo turned to the priest. "Who is her mother?" Father Daniel set the hymn books down on the end of the pew. "A woman who wants to live quietly. That is not what I asked." "No," Father Daniel said. "But it is the answer I can give you without betraying someone who came here afraid." Mateo's eyes darkened. Most men lowered their voices when Mateo looked at them that way. Father Daniel did not. He had baptized gangsters' children, buried their brothers, heard confessions from men who could not sleep after doing what they claimed had to be done. He was not immune to fear. He simply refused to let it become his master. Mateo lifted his left hand slightly. "This ring?" he said. "If her mother has the other one, then you know who she is." Father Daniel looked at the ring. For the first time, sadness crossed his face. "I know who she says she used to be." The answer hit Mateo harder than a confession. "Used to be." His voice dropped. "Claire." The priest did not deny it. Mateo turned away, then back again, his control tightening around him like wire. "She died." Father Daniel said nothing. "I buried her." "No," the priest said softly. "You buried what someone told you was left of her." The words should have made Mateo angry. Instead, they made him still. A dangerous stillness. "What do you know?" he asked. "I know she arrived in my church 3 months ago, with a child, 2 bags, and the look of a woman who checks every window before she sits down. I know she works when she can, pays what she can, and refuses help until her daughter needs something. I know Lily is bright, kind, and too used to moving. Why did she come back to Chicago?" Father Daniel hesitated. That hesitation told Mateo there was more. "Her mother was ill," the priest said. "She came back for the funeral. She intended to leave again. Before I saw the child. Before the child saw your ring." Mateo looked toward the hallway where Lily had gone. Lily Hayes, 8 years old, a child who noticed rings and sadness, a child whose mother cried over a promise Matteo thought had burned with everything else. His mind began moving, calculating dates, routes, names, lies. It was what he did when pain threatened to rise. He built structure around it. He made plans. Plans could be controlled. Pain could not. Father Daniel seemed to read him. "Matteo," he said. Matteo's gaze returned to him. "If you chase her like a criminal, you will lose whatever truth God just handed you." Matteo almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because the priest thought he still knew the difference between mercy and strategy. "You think I came here looking for her?" "No," Father Daniel said. "That is what worries me. Men are often most dangerous when God gives them what they stopped asking for." Before Matteo could respond, the front doors opened. Wind pushed rain into the church. A woman stepped inside, soaked from the storm, one hand gripping the strap of a worn leather bag. Her dark blonde hair was pinned badly at the back of her neck, strands loose around a face thinner than it had been 9 years ago. She wore a gray coat, cheap and practical, and boots wet to the ankle. She looked tired, not weak, tired in the way people come when they have spent years surviving quietly. "Lily?" she called. Matteo turned. The woman stopped. Her eyes found him. For a moment neither of them moved. 9 years vanished and stood between them like smoke. Claire Whitmore. Claire Moretti, though almost no one had ever known that name. Alive. Matteo had imagined this moment in nightmares, but in those dreams she was always walking away, always smiling with betrayal in her eyes. This woman did not smile. She looked at him as the floor had disappeared beneath her. Then her gaze dropped to his hand, to the ring. The same ring Lily had noticed. Her face changed, not guilt. Fear, raw, immediate fear. "Claire," Matteo said. Her name came out quieter than he expected. The hallway door opened behind Father Daniel, and Lily came out wearing a yellow raincoat with one sleeve half twisted. She smiled when she saw her mother. "Mom, I was waiting. I talked to the man with the ring." Clara's eyes closed for half a second. When she opened them, they were on Matteo. He had seen people afraid of him before. Men with guns, men tied to chairs, men who knew their last lie had failed. But this was different. Claire was not afraid for herself. She was afraid of what he might now know. "Lily," she said, her voice steady only because she forced it to be. "Come here." Now. Lily looked confused. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby, come here." The child walked to her mother, still holding the folded church bulletin. Claire placed one hand on Lily's shoulder and pulled her close, but not roughly. Protectively, instinctively, Matteo watched the gesture. A mother-s, child-s hand, a child-s trust, a life he had not known existed. He wanted to ask 100 questions. Why did you run? Did you betray me? Is she mine? Who helped you? Who lied? Who knew? But Lily was standing there, looking from one adult to another, trying to understand why the air had gone sharp. So Matteo said nothing. That silence cost him more than most men's confessions. Claire backed toward the doors. Father Daniel stepped aside, but his face was pale now too. He knew this moment could turn into many things, most of them dangerous. Matteo did not move. Claire reached the entrance. Rain blew in around her. For one brief second, she looked at him not like a fugitive, not like a woman caught, but like the woman who had once stood in a courthouse hallway after hours, laughing softly as he slipped a silver ring onto her finger and promised her a life he had no right to promise. Then she was gone. The doors closed behind her. Matteo stood in the aisle of St. Agnes Church, surrounded by candles, rain, and the echo of a childish voice. "Sir, my mom has a ring just like yours." Father Daniel spoke quietly behind him. "Let her leave tonight." Matteo looked at the door. Every instinct he had built over 46 years told him to follow, to send Nico, to lock down the bus stations, to check every traffic camera between the church and the highway, to turn the city into a net and pull until Claire stood in front of him with answers. But another image stopped him. Lily's face, open, trusting, unafraid, and Claire's hand on her shoulder. "If you chase her like a criminal, you will lose whatever truth God just handed you." Matteo lowered his eyes to the ring on his hand. For 9 years it had been a punishment. Tonight, it had become evidence. He turned the ring slowly with his thumb, feeling the worn inner engraving against his skin. CW, until the last breath. He had thought the promise ended in fire. Now a little girl had walked into his life and told him the fire had lied. Matteo looked at Father Daniel. I will let her leave tonight, he said. The priest exhaled carefully. Then Matteo added, but if someone else is hunting her, Father, I need to know before they find her first. Father Daniel did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. Matteo's expression hardened. Outside, thunder rolled over Chicago. And somewhere in the rain, Claire Whitmore's one running again with a child who had his ring in her memory, his eyes in her face, and no idea that one innocent sentence had just awakened the most dangerous man in the city. Not to destroy, not yet. This time Matteo Moretti was going to find the truth. And God helped the man who had buried it. Claire Whitmore did not run from the church. Running looked guilty. Running made people turn their heads. Running made children afraid, so she walked. She held Lily's hand firmly, not tight enough to hurt her, but tight enough to remind herself that the child was real, warm, alive, and still beside her. Rain slapped against the sidewalk and soaked through the shoulders of Claire's gray coat, but she did not slow down. Behind her, St. Agnes Church disappeared into the wet blur of streetlights and passing cars. Behind her, Matteo Moretti stood with the same silver ring on his hand, the same dark eyes, and the same terrifying stillness that had once made her feel safe. That was the cruelest part. 9 years had passed, and her body still remembered him as safety before her mind could remind her he was danger. Mom, Lily said, half jogging to keep up. You re-walking too fast. Claire forced herself to slow down. I am sorry, baby. Was I not supposed to talk to him? Claire looked down at her daughter's face, pale beneath the yellow hood of her raincoat. Lily's eyes were wide, worried, and too full of questions. Claire hated herself for putting that look there. A child should not have to measure every adult's silence. A child should not have to wonder if one innocent sentence had broken something. No, Claire said, softening her voice. You didn't do anything wrong, but you looked scared. Claire swallowed. The bus stop was only 2 blocks away. If the bus came on time, they could reach the motel, collect their bags, and be gone before midnight. Milwaukee first, maybe. Or Madison. No, not Madison. Too obvious. She needed cash. She needed the old documents from the lining of the blue suitcase. She needed to think 3 steps ahead, not one. I was surprised, she said. Lily studied her. Is surprise the same as scared? Sometimes, Claire thought, raising a smart child was like living with a tiny judge who loved you too much to let you lie badly. Sometimes, Claire said. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes and a flood of yellow light. Claire climbed on with Lily, paid in damp bills, and led her daughter to the back. She did not look out the rear window. She did not check if Matteo had followed. She wanted to. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to look. But if she looked, Lily would look too. So Claire stared forward to the rain strike the roof. Lily leaned against her side. Mom? Yes? Was that man my dad? The question did not shock Claire. Not really. She had known it was coming from the second Lily looked at Matteo's ring. Maybe from years earlier, every time Lily asked why other children had fathers at school and she did not. Claire had prepared answers for many things. Fire drills, bad men, strange cars. What to do if Mommy ever said, go with Father Daniel and Don to ask questions, but she had never found a good answer for this. Claire looked at her daughter's small hand resting on her knee. It was the same hand that had pointed at Matteo's ring, the same hand that had pulled the past out of its grave. He might be, Claire whispered. Lily went very still. Not excited, not frightened, just still. Does he know? Claire closed her eyes for a moment. He didn't, she said. Not before tonight. Lily nodded slowly, as if filing the answer away. He looked sad. Claire turned her face toward the rain-dark window, so her daughter would not see what those words did to her. Matteo Moretti had messy faces. The world knew the cold one. His enemies knew the merciless one. His men knew the silent one that meant orders were coming, and someone would regret being born. Claire had known another face once. The one he wore at 2 in the morning when he thought she was asleep. The one he wore when he touched her hair like something fragile he was afraid to deserve. The one he wore the night he slid a silver ring onto her finger in a courthouse hallway and said, I cannot give you peace yet, Claire, but I can give you the truth. I am yours until my last breath. She had believed him. God help her, she still did. The motel sat behind a gas station near the edge of the city, the kind of place where nobody asked questions because nobody staying there wanted to answer any. Claire had chosen it for that reason. The carpet smelled faintly of smoke. The heater clicked too loudly. The curtains did not close all the way unless she pinned them with a hair clip. It was not safe, but it had been enough. Until tonight. Claire locked the door, then the chain, then pushed a chair under the handle. Lily watched from the bed, hugging her backpack against her chest. Are we leaving again? Lily asked. Claire stopped. There it was. The cost. Not in money. Not in miles. In the tired acceptance in her child's voice, Claire knelt in front of her. I need you to listen to me carefully. I know, Lily said. Pack only what fits in the blue bag. Don't to take library books because names are inside. Put my drawing notebook in my coat, not the suitcase. Claire's throat tightened. No 8-year-old should know how to disappear. She placed both hands on Lily's shoulders. I am sorry. Lily frowned. For what? For making you learn all this. Lily thought about it. You said we learn things so we can be brave. Claire gave a broken little smile. I did say that, then I learned good. Claire pulled her into her arms. She held her too tightly for 1 second, then made herself let go. Love could not become panic. Panic's mistakes. Put your pajamas in the backpack, Claire said, and your blue sweater. While Lily packed, Claire went to the bathroom and shut the door. Only then did she pull the chain from beneath her shirt. The silver ring swung under the harsh motel light. Old. Scratched. Impossible. Until the last breath. She should have thrown it away 9 years ago. She should have sold it when she needed rent. She should have buried it with the name Whitmore, and the woman who had once believed love could survive in the shadow of men like Matteo. But she had kept it. Not because she planned to go back. Because some promises did not die cleanly. Her phone vibrated on the sink. Claire froze. The number was unknown. She knew before answering. She knew in her bones. Still, she pressed the phone to her ear and said nothing. For a moment, there was only static and rain. Then Matteo's voice came through. Claire. She gripped the sink so hard her knuckles whitened. Nobody had said her real name like that in 9 years. Not with recognition, not with pain, not with the right to remember how it sounded in the dark. If you come near my daughter, she said, keeping her voice low, I disappear again. There was a pause. Then he asked, quietly, Our daughter? Claire closed her eyes. That one word nearly undid her. Our. She had spent 9 years making herself say my daughter. My responsibility, my fear, my mistake, my life, not ours. Never ours. Because ours meant Matteo had lost something too, and she could not afford pity. Pity made people slow. Slow people got caught. Do not follow us, she said. Claire, listen to me. No, you listen. She is 8 years old. She does not know your world. She does not know your name. She does not know what men do when they find weakness. She is not weakness. Claire almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. In your world, everything loved becomes leverage. The silence that followed was different. He had no answer because both of them knew she was right. Finally, Matteo said, Did you betray me? Claire opened her eyes. In the mirror, she saw herself as she was now, tired, wet, older than 41 should look. But beneath that, for one sharp second, she saw the woman she had been before the fire. No, she said, one word. 9 years late. Matteo inhaled softly on the other end of the line. Then why did you run? A sound came from outside the bathroom. A car door closing. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Claire pushed away from the sink. Because Vincent told me the truth would get you killed. This time, Matteo said nothing. She could feel the name land. Vincent. The man who had stood close enough to Matteo to poison his grief. The man who had smiled gently while destroying them both. Claire heard footsteps outside the motel room, not Lily's, adult. Slow. She turned off the bathroom light. Matteo, she whispered. His voice changed instantly. What is it? Someone said here. The handle of the motel room door moved once. Lily looked up from the bed, eyes wide. Claire stepped out of the bathroom and pressed a finger to her lips. Lily slid off the bed without a word, grabbed her backpack, and moved toward the narrow space between the dresser and the wall. They had practiced this. Claire hated that they had practiced this. The handle moved again, then stopped. A shadow crossed the thin gap beneath the door. Claire held her breath. Her phone was still pressed to her ear. Mateo's voice was low, controlled, and deadly. Claire, tell me where you are. She did not answer, because if she did, he would come, and if he came, the world she had been running from would crash through with him. Outside, the footsteps moved away. A car engine started, then silence. Claire waited 10 seconds, 20, 30. Only then did she breathe. Mom, Lily whispered. Claire crossed the room, grabbed the blue suitcase from under the bed, and opened it. There was almost more time. Put on your shoes. On the phone, Mateo said Claire. She lifted the phone again. I can trust anyone near you, she said. I don't know who belongs to you and who belongs to him. You can trust me. The pain in his voice almost broke her. Almost. I did, she said. Once. Then she ended the call. 10 minutes later, Claire and Lily left through the bathroom window into the narrow alley behind the motel. Rain soaked them within seconds. Claire carried the suitcase in one hand and Lily's hand in the other. They moved behind the gas station, past the dumpsters, past a broken fence, toward the late-night bus stop 2 streets over. Claire did not see the black sedan parked beneath the dead streetlight. She did not see the man inside lower his camera. She did not hear him make a call. By the time Mateo's people reached the motel, the room was empty. The chair was still beneath the door. The bed was stripped. A wet towel lay on the floor. The bathroom window was open, rain blowing through the gap. Nico Bellini stood in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear. She's gone, he said. Mateo's arrived 7 minutes later. He entered without speaking. His eyes moved over the room with cold precision. The suitcase mark on the carpet, the missing toothbrush, the open window, the way the mirror had been wiped clean in a hurry. Then he saw the words, written in lipstick on the bathroom mirror, not large, not dramatic, just 3 words, slightly crooked because Claire must have written them fast. Vincent knows. Mateo stared at the message. For 9 years, Vincent Caruso had stood at his right hand, advised him, comforted his mother, spoken Claire's name with disgust, told him betrayal was a lesson men like Mateo could not afford to forget. Now Claire was alive, there was a child, and Vincent knew. Nico stepped beside him. What do you want me to do? Mateo did not answer right away. He looked at the lipstick on the mirror, then at the rainwater gathering beneath the open window. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. Find Vincent, he said, quietly. Nico nodded. And Claire? Mateo turned his ring once around his finger. The silver felt heavier than it had in 9 years. We do not hunt her, he said. We protect the roads she might take. Nico looked surprised, but he was smart enough not to show too much of it. Mateo walked back into the motel room and picked up something from the floor near the bed. A purple crayon. Small. Broken at the tip. He closed his hand around it. Outside, the rain kept falling over Chicago, washing nothing clean. Claire Whitmore had died once in a fire. Then she had died again in Mateo's heart. But tonight, she had returned with a daughter, a warning, and a truth sharp enough to cut through 9 years of lies. And somewhere in the city, Vincent Caruso had just made the mistake of touching the only thing Mateo Moretti feared losing more than power, his family. By sunrise, Chicago looked less like a city and more like a confession washed halfway clean. The rain had stopped before dawn, leaving the streets slick and reflective, the gutters carrying cigarette butts, leaves, and yesterday's secrets toward the drains. Mateo Moretti stood at the window of his study and watched the city wake beneath a low gray sky. He had not slept. Men like him learned to function without sleep the ways soldiers learn to function with blood on their sleeves. But this was different. Exhaustion had never bothered him. Uncertainty did. Behind him, Nico Bellini stood near the desk with a folder in one hand and a phone in the other. He had been Mateo's right hand for 11 years, long enough to know when to speak and when silence was safer. Nico was built like a man who had learned early that the world respected size before reason. Broad shoulders, dark stubble, eyes that missed very little. He was loyal, but his loyalty had teeth. If Mateo told him to close the city, Nico would do it before asking why. That was why Mateo had not told him. Not fully. Not yet. She left through the bathroom window, Nico said. Took the girl, 1 suitcase, 2 backpacks. Bus cameras caught them 3 blocks east, but they changed routes twice. Smart. She knows how to disappear. Mateo did not turn from the window. She had 9 years to practice. Nico hesitated. You want every station watched? No. The airports? No. Mateo turned then, and one look was enough to cut the argument in half. We do not chase her like prey. Nico's jaw tightened. If Vincent knows about the girl, every hour matters. I know that. Then let me bring them in. Mateo's left hand closed around the silver ring. And if Claire sees my men grabbing her daughter off a street corner, what do you think she does next? Nico did not answer. She runs harder, Mateo said. She disappears deeper. And the next time, even Father Daniel wanted to know where she went. Nico looked down at the folder, then back at Mateo. So what do? We make the roads safer beneath her feet. It was not the answer Nico wanted. Mateo could see that. In their world, fear was usually answered with force. A problem appeared, you surrounded it, controlled it, removed it. That had been Mateo's language for most of his adult life. But Claire was not a problem. Lily was not a problem. And if he treated them like pieces on a board, he would become exactly the man Claire had spent 9 years running from. That thought settled in him with more weight than he cared to admit. The door opened without a knock. Only one person in the Moretti estate could still do that and remain alive. Rosa Moretti entered with a black shawl around her shoulders and a rosary wrapped once around her wrist. At 72, she carried herself with the hard grace of a woman who had buried a husband, raised a son in a house full of enemies, and learned not to cry where men could mistake grief for permission. Her hair was silver now, pinned back severely, but her eyes were Mateo's eyes, dark, direct, unforgiving when necessary. Nico, she said. He straightened. Mrs. Moretti, leave us. Nico looked to Mateo. Mateo nodded once. Nico placed the folder on the desk and left, closing the door behind him. Rosa waited until his footsteps faded. Then she said, Tell me about the child. Mateo looked at the folder instead of his mother. Her name is Lily Hayes, 8 years old. Claire is using the name Hayes. Hayes. Rosa said it with quiet dislike, as if the false name itself had offended the family. She was born in Wisconsin, Mateo continued. Late filed birth certificate. Father listed as unknown. Rosa crossed the room slowly. When? Mato did not answer right away. His mother's voice softened, just barely. 7 months since after the fire. The room went still. Rosa closed her eyes. Her fingers tightened over the rosary, bead by bead. When she opened them again, they were wet, but no tears fell. Rosa had always believed tears should be given only to people who would not use them against you. I knew it, she whispered. Mateo's expression hardened. You knew nothing. I knew Claire did not betray you. You had no proof. No, Rosa said. I had eyes. Mateo looked away. That was the problem. His mother had said it many times in the first year after the fire. Claire loved you. Claire was frightened of something. Claire would not sell you out. But Mateo had been younger then, angrier, humiliated by grief and betrayal. He had Vincent in one ear, evidence in front of him, blood in his mouth, from the night he nearly beat a man to death over Claire's name. He had not wanted doubt. Doubt was pain without a target. Rosa walked to his desk and picked up the photograph Nico had printed from the church security camera. It was grainy, slightly blurred, but Lily's face was clear enough. She was sitting in the pew, looking down at her drawing, one foot lifted because it could not reach the floor. Rosa stared at the photo for a long time. Then she sat down. That frightened Mateo more than if she had cried. She has your father's eyes, Rosa said. Dante, she does. You cannot know that from a picture. Rosa looked up at him. I raised you. I buried your father. I have spent 46 years looking at that bloodline in one mirror or another. Do not tell me what I can recognize. Mateo's voice dropped. If we say it before we prove it, we make it real. It may already be real. That is exactly why I cannot say it. Rosa understood then. Her son was not refusing hope because he was cold. He was refusing it because hope was more dangerous than grief. Grief had walls. Hope opened doors. And behind those doors were things he did not know if he could survive losing again. She set the photo down gently. Tell me about the ring, she said. Mateo looked at his hand. The ring was plain silver, old now, scratched from years of wear. Men had tried to read meaning into it. Some thought it belonged to his father. Some thought it was a family signet without the crest. Some thought it was religious. Mateo had never corrected them. He preferred people building wrong stories around the few truths he could keep private. I had two made, he said. Before the wedding, Rosa's mouth tightened. She had not been invited to that wedding. Almost no one had. Mateo and Claire had gone to a courthouse after hours, with a judge who owed Mateo's father a favor and a clerk who understood when to forget faces. Inside mine, Mateo said, turning the ring slowly, it says CW until the last breath. Inside hers, who else knew? The jeweler. He died 5 years ago, Claire, me. Vincent? Mateo's eyes lifted. For a moment, neither spoke. That was the first time the thought formed clearly enough to stand between them. Vincent had always known too much. After the fire, Vincent had been the one to identify the stolen documents. Vincent had been the one to bring Mateo the report. Vincent had been the one to say Claire had been seen meeting a Caruso courier 2 nights before she vanished. Vincent had been the one who placed a steady hand on Mateo's shoulder and told him that love made even smart men stupid. And Mateo had believed him. Because Vincent had family in every way except blood, Rosa saw the realization sharpen in her son's face. Be careful, she said. If Vincent did this, he did not do it alone. I know. No, Rosa said. You know how to punish betrayal. This is different. This is a child. This is Claire. This is the place inside you where you stop thinking. Mateo's jaw tightened. His mother stepped closer. Listen to me. Power is easy for men like you. Restraint is what will decide if that little girl ever trusts you. Before Mateo could answer, his phone vibrated on the desk. Unknown number. He picked it up. There was silence first, then a breath. Claire. He knew before she spoke. I need Father Daniel, she said. Mateo closed his eyes briefly. Her voice was thin with exhaustion, but steady. Always steady when she was scared. He is safe, Mateo said. I didn't call to talk to you, I know. A pause. Then Claire said, Is Lily safe with you knowing? The question cut deeper than accusation. Mateo looked at the photograph on the desk. Lily in the church. Lily with the crayon. Lily saying his ring looked like her mother S. She is safer than she was yesterday, he said. That is an answer. It is the only honest one. Claire breathed out. He could hear traffic behind her. Maybe a bus station, maybe a street corner. She was moving. Of course she was moving. Did you betray me? He asked. The words came before he could stop them. Not because he did not know what she had said the night before, but because 9 years of poison did not leave the blood after one answer. No, Claire said. This time, she did not whisper it. The word stood firm. Mateo gripped the phone. Is Lily mine? Silence. In that silence, Rosa watched her son become a man waiting outside a locked room with his whole life on the other side. Claire finally said, She is innocent. That matters more than blood. Mateo's voice softened. Blood is not why I would protect her. Another silence. This one changed something. Because Claire had expected a claim, a demand, a Moretti declaration. She had expected him to say my daughter, if she is mine, my blood, my right. Instead, he had said protect, not possess. Protect. When Claire spoke again, her voice was lower. I don't know who to trust. Trust Father Daniel. I do. Then let him help you. And you? Mateo looked at his mother. Rosa held his gaze, warning him without words not to make promises out of pride. So he told the truth. You should not trust me quickly, but you can trust this. I will not let Vincent reach her. Claire gave a small, broken laugh with no humor in it. You trusted Vincent for years. Yes, Mateo said. That is my sin to carry. The line went quiet. Then Claire said, Father Daniel will know where to leave a message. The call ended. Mateo lowered the phone slowly. Rosa touched the photo of Lily with 2 fingers, as if blessing it. What now? She asked. Mateo looked toward the window, out at the gray city where Claire and Lily were hiding from his enemies, his name, and maybe from him most of all. Now, he said, we find out how many Vincent built before I burn down the wrong house. Across town, in a private office above a shuttered restaurant, Vincent Caruso listened to a recording of Claire S. call through a small speaker. He was an older man with careful hands, silver hair, and the patient expression of someone who had survived by letting younger men make louder mistakes. A half-finished espresso sat beside him. He had not touched it since hearing Lily's name. When the recording ended, one of his men asked, What do you want us to do? Vincent leaned back in his chair. For 9 years, the past had stayed buried because everyone involved believed the same lie from a different angle. Matteo believed Claire betrayed him. Claire believed Matteo would get himself killed if he found her. Rosa had suspicions without proof. Father Daniel had conscience without power. But now there was a child. Children were dangerous, not because they were strong, because they asked simple questions adults spent years avoiding. Vincent smiled faintly. So Claire came back with a daughter, he said. Yes, sir. And Matteo saw her? At the church. Vincent turned the silver spoon beside his cup. That is unfortunate. Should we take care of the woman? Vincent looked at him with mild disappointment. Do not be stupid. If Claire dies now, Matteo stops grieving and starts thinking. The man lowered his eyes. Vincent stood and walked to the window. Below, morning traffic moved through Chicago, each car carrying someone convinced their private troubles mattered. He had always found that amusing. Most people did not understand that power belonged to the person who could see which troubles connected. Claire was not the threat, the girl was. The girl could make Matteo human again, and a human Matteo, grieving and awake, would ask questions the old Matteo had been too angry to ask. Vincent tapped one finger against the glass. Find the child, he said quietly. And Claire? Watch her. And Matteo? Vincent smiled. Let him hope. Hope makes men careless. But for the first time in 9 years, Vincent Caruso had misread Matteo Moretti. Because Matteo was not careless, not anymore. He was afraid. And fear, when tied to love, can either make a man reckless or make him wise. This time, Matteo chose wisdom. He would not hunt Claire. He would not drag Lily into his house like proof of ownership. He would not let rage decide the shape of justice. But somewhere beneath the restraint, beneath the discipline, beneath the cold patience that had made him powerful, one truth had settled into his bones. Only 2 rings had ever existed. Claire had the other one. Lily had seen it. And whatever else had been stolen from him 9 years ago, the lie was beginning to crack. Father Daniel did not bring them together in the main chapel. He knew better than that. The chapel belonged to candles, hymns, and people asking God for mercy in public. What Claire needed that night was not public mercy. What Matteo needed was not a stage. So the priest led them down the narrow stairs behind the sacristy, into the church basement where the old stone walls held the cold, and the air smelled faintly of coffee, dust, and furniture polish. The room had once been used for parish meetings. A long table stood in the center, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Against one wall were boxes of donated coats. Against another, a faded poster reminded children to wash their hands before snack time. Nothing in that room belonged to Matteo Moretti's world. There was no marble, no polished wood, no armed men waiting in corners. Just a humming radiator, a crucifix on the wall, and a little girl asleep on a worn sofa under a donated quilt. Lily had fought sleep at first. She said she was not tired. Then she asked if Matteo was leaving. Then she asked if her mother was mad. Then she curled up with a stuffed rabbit Father Daniel found in a cardboard box marked toys, and fell asleep with one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Claire sat across from Matteo at the long table. She had chosen the chair closest to Lily. Matteo noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. But for once, he did not use what he noticed. He simply sat with both hands on the table, his silver ring catching the basement light each time the old fluorescent bulb flickered overhead. Father Daniel stood near the stairs. I will be upstairs, he said quietly. No one else comes down unless Claire asks for me. Matteo looked at him. You think I would hurt her? I think pain makes men confuse answers with ownership. Claire looked down at her hands. Matteo did not argue. That told her something. The old Matteo would not have argued either, but for a different reason. He used to let priests speak because he found them harmless. Tonight, he let Father Daniel speak because he knew the man was right. When the priest left, the silence became almost physical. Claire could hear rainwater dripping somewhere in the pipes. She could hear Lily's soft breathing from the sofa. She could hear her own heartbeat, too fast, too loud, like a warning she had learned to live with. Matteo spoke first. I left my gun upstairs. Claire looked at him. He did not say it like a noble gesture. He said it like a fact she had the right to know. Why? She asked. Because if you are going to tell me why you ran, You should not have to look at a weapon while you do it. That answer hurt more than it should have. Claire looked away before he could see it. For 9 years, she had survived by making Matteo simple in her mind. Dangerous, powerful, untouchable. A man who would burn the world if he thought someone had stolen from him. That version had kept her moving. It had helped her pack in the middle of the night. It had helped her change names, change towns, change jobs, and smile at landlords while lying about where she came from. But the man sitting across from her now had left his gun upstairs because he understood fear. That made everything harder. "You want the truth," Claire said. "I have wanted it for 9 years." "No," she said. "You wanted a truth you could punish." Matteo went still. The words were cruel, but not careless. Claire needed him to understand the difference. She had not come back to be dragged into a courtroom of his grief. She had not survived 9 years to sit in a church basement and beg a mafia boss to believe her. Matteo lowered his eyes for a moment, then looked back at her. "You right." Claire had not expected that. It stole the next sentence from her mouth. He said quietly, "I wanted someone to blame. Vincent gave me someone. I chose to believe him." The name moved through the room like smoke. Vincent. Even asleep, Lily shifted slightly on the sofa, as if some part of her could feel the coldness attached to that man. Claire folded her hands together. "I found out I was pregnant 3 days before the fire," she said. Matteo did not move, not even his eyes. "I bought a test at a drugstore in Oak Park. I remember because it was raining that day too. I sat in the bathroom at the school where I was teaching, staring at those 2 lines, and all I could think was that I had no idea how to tell you. Not because I thought you would be angry." Her voice softened in spite of herself. "Because I thought you would be happy." Something broke across Matteo's face. It was quick, almost invisible, but Claire saw it. She had always seen too much in him. That had been part of the trouble. "I was going to tell you that night," she continued. "But Vincent came to see me first." Matteo's jaw tightened. "He said your enemies knew about me. He said they knew about the pregnancy. I told him he was lying. I hadn't told anyone, not even you. But he showed me pictures. Women I didn't know. Dead women. He told me they were messages from men who wanted to hurt you through me." Matteo's voice was low. "Why would you believe him?" "Because 2 hours later someone shot at my car." Matteo stopped breathing for a second. Claire nodded slowly. "You didn't know that, did you?" "No. I called the number Vincent gave me because he told me your phone was being watched. He sent 2 men to pick me up. They said they were yours. They knew your house. They knew your schedule. They knew things only your people should have known." Matteo looked down at his ring. His silence was no longer cold. It was calculation turning inward, cutting him piece by piece. "They took me to the safe house," Claire said. "Vincent was waiting. He said the only way to protect you and the baby was for me to disappear before your enemies could prove I mattered. I told him no. I told him I would wait for you." Her mouth trembled once. She pressed her lips together until it stopped. Then the house caught fire. Matteo looked up. Claire's eyes were wet now, but her voice stayed steady. "I don't know if he planned for someone to die there. Maybe he did. Maybe he just used what happened. But there was a woman in that house. One of his people, I think. She was already dead when I saw her. Vincent told me they would identify her as me. He told me if I tried to contact you, he would make sure the next body was yours." Matteo stood so suddenly the chair scraped against the floor. Lily stirred. Claire's eyes flashed. "Sit down." The command was quiet, but it landed. Matteo looked at Lily, then at Claire. Then he sat back down. That one act told her more than an apology could have. "You think I wanted to run?" Claire asked, her voice breaking at last. "You think I wanted to raise your child in motel rooms and borrowed apartments? You think I wanted to teach her how to hide in closets before I taught her how to ride a bike?" Matteo said nothing. Good. She needed him to hear it. "I was 29 years old, pregnant and alone. Everyone around you carried guns. Everyone smiled at me like they were loyal. But I could not tell who belonged to you and who belonged to Vincent. And I had one job, one." She looked toward Lily. "Keep her alive." Matteo's face changed again, not dramatically. Matteo did not fall apart in obvious ways. But something in his expression gave way. The old anger that had protected him for 9 years had nowhere to stand now. He asked, almost hoarsely, Why didn't you send word later? I tried once. His eyes sharpened. When Lily was 6 months old. I sent a letter through a woman who worked at a clinic in Milwaukee. She had family in Chicago. She promised she could get it to someone close to you. What happened? 2 days later, Vincent found us. Mateo closed his eyes. Claire said, he didn't touch Lily. He didn't have to. He stood outside her nursery window and called me from the sidewalk. He said, beautiful child. It would be a shame if Mateo's enemies learned she existed. After that, I stopped trying. The radiator hummed. Lily slept. Mateo opened his eyes, and for the first time since Claire had known him, he looked not powerful, not dangerous, not even angry. He looked ashamed. I should have questioned it, he said. Clara's voice softened, but only a little. Yes, I should have questioned him. Yes, I should have found you. Claire looked at him across the table. Maybe. But I also should have known love without trust can still become fear. That made him look at her. She took a breath. I loved you, Mateo. But I was afraid of your world. And Vincent knew that. He did not create my fear from nothing. He used what was already there. Those words were not meant to wound him. They were meant to tell the truth fully. Claire had learned the hard way that half-truths were just lies with better manners. Before Mateo could answer, Lily's small voice came from the sofa. Mom? Claire turned immediately. Lily was sitting up, hair messy, clutched in one arm. Her eyes moved from Claire to Mateo. Are you crying? Claire wiped her face quickly. A little, baby. Lily slid off the sofa and walked toward them. She stopped beside Clara's chair but looked at Mateo. Are you mad at my mom? Mateo looked at the child. His child, maybe. No, not maybe. Something in the room already knew what the paper would later prove. He did not rush his answer. No, he said. I am not mad at your mom. Lily studied him carefully. Are you mad at me? The question hit him harder than anything Claire had said. Mateo stood, slowly this time, then lowered himself to one knee so he was not towering over her. No, he said, never. Lily looked down at his ring again. Then she asked the question that had been waiting since the church. Are you my dad? Claire stopped breathing. Mateo looked at Claire first, not for permission to claim, for permission not to hurt. Claire gave the smallest nod. Not yes, not no, just honesty. Mateo turned back to Lily. I hope so, he said. Lily frowned. You don't know? Not yet. How do grown-ups not know important things? Claire let out a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Mateo looked at Lily with a sadness so open it made him seem younger. Sometimes, he said, grown-ups believe the wrong people. Lily thought about that. Mom says lying makes everything harder later. Mateo glanced at Claire. She is right. Lily nodded, satisfied with that. Then she yawned. Claire reached for her, but Lily surprised them both by stepping closer to Mateo. If you are my dad, she said, you have to be nice to Mom. Mateo's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. That is fair. And you can yell. I can try. Lily narrowed her eyes. Mateo corrected himself. I will not yell at your mother. Lily nodded again. Okay. Then she went back to the sofa, curled under the quilt, and fell asleep as if she had not just rearranged the hearts of two damaged adults. Claire and Mateo sat in silence. After a long moment, Claire said, we do a DNA test. Quietly. No Moretti doctor, no one from your world. Agreed. If she is yours, that does not mean you decide everything. I know. She does not move into your house. I know. She does not become an heir, a symbol, a bargaining chip, or proof that you won something. Mateo's voice was low. She is a child. Claire stared at him. For the first time in 9 years, she believed he understood at least that much. And if the test says she is not yours? She asked. Mateo looked at Lily sleeping under the donated quilt, the purple crayon still tucked in the pocket of her raincoat. Then Vincent still knows about her, he said, and I still protect her. Claire looked away because that answer frightened her almost as much as it comforted her. Upstairs, the church bell rang once in the darkness. None of them heard the soft click outside the basement window. Across the street, a man in a parked car lowered his camera and checked the photograph on the screen. Lily's face, Claire's profile, Mateo on one knee before the child. The man sent the image to Vincent Caruso. The reply came less than a minute later, confirmed, and beneath it, prepare the next move. The DNA test was supposed to take 3 days. By the second day, it already felt like 3 years. Claire stayed at a small apartment Father Daniel had arranged through an elderly parishioner who was spending the winter with her sister in Florida. It was above a closed flower shop 2 streets from St. Agnes with old radiators, lace curtains, and a kitchen table that wobbled unless someone folded a napkin beneath one leg. It was not beautiful, but it had 2 locks on the door, a fire escape outside the bedroom window, and a back stairwell that emptied into an alley. Claire checked all 3 twice before letting herself breathe. Lily did not complain. That worried Claire more than complaining would have. Children should complain about strange beds. They should ask for cereal, cartoons, and the stuffed animals left behind in motel rooms. But Lily had learned the quiet obedience of a child raised near danger. She put her backpack beside the bed. She folded her clothes. She asked which window was safest if they needed to leave quickly. Claire almost broke right there. Instead, she knelt in front of her daughter and took both of Lily's hands. "Baby," she said softly, "I don't want you to have to think like that all the time." Lily looked at her with serious eyes. "But you said thinking ahead keeps us safe." "I did. Was that wrong?" Claire closed her eyes for a second. There were so many ways to search a child without ever meaning to. Too much fear could become a second language. Too much caution could make the world feel like a room with no doors. "No," Claire said. "It wasn't a wrong, but being safe is not the same as being scared all the time." Lily thought about that. "Is Mr. Mateo safe?" Claire did not answer quickly enough. Lily noticed. "Of course she did. He talks soft," Lily said. "But everybody gets quiet when he walks in." Claire gave a tired smile. "That is a very good observation. Is he bad?" The question was simple. The answer was not. Claire looked toward the window, where evening light lay dull and gray against the glass. "Your father has done bad things," she said carefully. Lily sat very still. Claire turned back to her. "But that does not mean there is nothing good in him." Lily frowned. "So he is both?" Claire brushed a loose strand of hair from Lily's face. "Most people are." That night, after Lily fell asleep, Claire sat at the kitchen table with her phone in front of her and the silver ring resting in her palm. She had taken it off the chain for the first time in months. The skin beneath her collarbone felt strangely bare without it. For 9 years, the ring had been hidden, warm against her heart, a private wound nobody could see. Now it lay in the open under the yellow kitchen light, small enough to fit inside her fist and heavy enough to hold an entire life. She turned it slowly, until the last breath. She wondered if promises counted when fear made people break them. She wondered if love could still be love after 9 years of silence, lies, and survival. She wondered if Mateo had hated her every day, or only on the days he missed her most. Her phone buzzed. A message from Father Daniel. "He wants to see Lily tomorrow. Only if you agree. Church garden, noon. You may stay beside her the whole time." Claire stared at the words. She wanted to say no. No would be simple. No would protect the little space she still controlled. No would keep Mateo at a distance, where memory could not confuse itself with hope. But then she thought of Lily asking if he was bad. She thought of Mateo kneeling in the basement, looking at her daughter as if the ground under his life had shifted. She thought of his answer. "If the test says she is not yours, then Vincent still knows about her, and I still protect her." Claire picked up the phone. No guards in sight. No gifts. No promises. 30 minutes. Father Daniel replied a minute later. "Agreed." The next day, Matteo arrived at the church garden without his men. Claire knew they were somewhere nearby. Matteo Moretti did not move through Chicago unprotected. But he had done what she asked. No black cars at the curb. No broad-shouldered men pretending not to watch. No show of power. Just Matteo, in a dark overcoat, standing beside a stone bench beneath bare winter branches. Lily held Clara's hand until they reached the garden gate. Then, to Clara's surprise, she let go. Matteo noticed that too. He noticed everything, but he did not smile like he had won something. He only lowered himself onto the bench so he would not tower over Lily. "Hello, Lily. Hello." Claire stood a few feet away, arms folded, close enough to hear every word, close enough to step in if she needed to. Matteo did not object. Lily studied him openly. "Do you like pancakes?" The question caught him off guard. Claire saw it. For one brief moment, Matteo looked like a man facing an opponent whose strategy he did not understand. "Yes," he said, "I like pancakes." With blueberries or chocolate chips? Blueberries. Lily nodded, as if this was important. Mom likes plain ones because she says chocolate chips for breakfast is not breakfast. She has always had strong opinions. Claire's eyes lifted to him. The sentence was gentle, almost fond. Lily continued, "Do you have a dog?" "No. Do you want one?" "I have never thought about it. You should. Dogs make houses less quiet." Mateo looked at Claire then, and she saw the line land somewhere deep. He lived in a house full of men, phones, cars, decisions, orders, and somehow Lily had guessed it was quiet. "I will consider it," he said. Lily sat beside him, leaving a careful space between them. Then she asked the question Claire had feared. "If you re my dad, why didn't you find me?" The garden seemed to stop breathing. Claire stepped forward slightly, but Mateo lifted one hand, not to silence her, only to show he would answer carefully. He looked at Lily, not Claire. "Because I believed a lie," he said, "and because I was too angry to question it." Lily swung her feet under the bench. "Mom says angry people miss important things." Mateo looked toward Claire, and the regret in his face was so naked she almost turned away. "Your mom is right," he said. "She usually was." Claire had no defense against that. "Not after all these years." Lily looked down at his hand. "Do you still wear the ring because of Mom?" Mateo lowered his eyes to the silver band. "Yes, even when you thought she was bad." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes. Why?" Claire held her breath. Mateo turned the ring once. "Because part of me knew hate was not the whole truth." Lily accepted that in the strange, solemn way children sometimes accept answers adults would argue with for years. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made this." She handed it to him. Mateo unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing in purple, blue, and yellow crayon. Three people stood in front of a church. The woman had a chain around her neck. The man had a ring on his hand. The little girl between them had both hands raised, holding one hand of each adult. Above them, in uneven letters, Lily had written, "Maybe." Mateo stared at the drawing for a long time. Claire watched his throat move as he swallowed. "May I keep this?" he asked. Lily looked pleased. "If you don't see, lose it." I won tea. The 30 minutes passed too quickly and too slowly at once. When it was time to leave, Lily surprised Claire again by turning back to Mateo. "If the paper says you re my dad," she said, "do I have to call you dad right away?" Mateo folded the drawing and placed it inside his coat with the care of a man handling something sacred. "No," he said, "you do not have to call me anything before you are ready." "What should I call you?" "Mateo is fine." Lily wrinkled her nose. "That sounds too grown up." For the first time, Claire saw Mateo almost smile. "I am grown up." "Very grown up," Lily said. Claire pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. Mateo looked at his daughter because by then, whether the paper had arrived or not, some truth had already taken shape, and said, "Then you may choose." Lily thought about it seriously. "I'll call you Mr. Mateo until I decide." "That is acceptable." That evening, the results came. Father Daniel brought the envelope himself. He did not send a message, did not call, did not trust the mail slot or the hands of anyone else. He climbed the narrow stairs above the flower shop and placed the sealed envelope on the kitchen table, as if it were both ordinary paper and a loaded gun. Claire stared at it. Lily sat beside her, small hands folded in her lap. Mateo stood near the door because Claire had not invited him farther in. He respected that. It made the room feel even smaller. No one spoke. Finally, Claire picked up the envelope. Her fingers shook once. She hated that they shook. She had signed false names, crossed state lines, lied to landlords, faced Vincent S. voice over the phone, and raised a child alone with fear breathing down her neck. But a piece of paper nearly undid her. She opened it. Her eyes moved over the words. Once, twice, then she closed them. Mateo did not move. Claire looked at Lily first, then at him. She handed him the paper. Mateo took it. For a man who had read contracts, threats, death notices, indictments, and betrayal in every possible form, he took a long time to read one sentence. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. The kitchen went silent. Not empty silent, full silent. The kind of silence that comes when the truth has finally entered the room and everyone understands there is no going back. Mateo read the number again. Then he lowered the paper. His face did not crumple, he did not make a dramatic sound. He did not grab Lily or pull Claire into some sudden embrace the moment did not deserve. He simply put one hand on the back of a chair because, for the first time since Claire had known him, his body seemed unsure how to hold him up. Lily looked at Claire. Claire nodded. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "He is your father." Lily turned to Matteo. He lowered himself to one knee, just as he had in the church basement, just as he should have been able to do 8 years earlier. "I am your father," he said. Lily looked at him carefully. Her eyes were dry, but her bottom lip trembled. "Does that mean you'll stay?" The question nearly destroyed him. Matteo had survived men aiming guns at his chest. He had survived police raids, funerals, betrayals, and the kind of grief that turns people into stone. But nothing had prepared him for a child asking whether he would leave before she had even learned how to keep him. His voice was rough when he answered. "For as long as you let me." Lily moved first. Not fast, not dramatically. She stepped forward and placed both arms around his neck. Matteo froze for half a second, as if afraid touching her back might break some rule he had not yet earned the right to cross. Then, slowly, he wrapped one arm around her and held her with heartbreaking care. Claire turned away, but not before he saw the tears in her eyes. Father Daniel looked down at the table. Some prayers, he knew, did not need words. Later that night, Matteo brought Lily to meet Rosa properly. The old woman tried to prepare herself. She stood in the sitting room with tea untouched on the table and a box of family photographs beside her. She told herself she would be calm. She would not frighten the child. She would not cry like a foolish old woman who had waited too long for a miracle. Then Lily walked in. Rosa saw the eyes, the shape of the chin, the careful way the child looked around before trusting the room, and all the strength went out of her face. Lily stood in front of her and asked, "Are you my grandma?" Rosa covered her mouth with one hand. Matteo looked away. Claire stood very still. Rosa lowered herself slowly, not because she was weak, but because the moment deserved humility. "If you want me to be," she said. Lily thought about it. "I've never had one before." That was all it took. Rosa pulled her into her arms and held her tightly, whispering something in Italian that Lily did not understand but somehow accepted. Matteo watched them. For one brief, impossible moment, the world did not feel like a battlefield. Then his phone rang. He stepped into the hallway and answered. The voice on the other end belonged to Ethan Brooks, a federal investigator Matteo had known too long to call a friend and respected too much to call an enemy. "We have a problem," Ethan said. Matteo's eyes moved to the sitting room, where Lily was laughing softly as Rosa showed her a picture of Matteo as a boy. "What kind of problem?" "Claire Whitmore's death file was accessed this afternoon." Matteo went cold. "By who?" "Not police, not federal. Private legal network. One connected to Vincent Caruso." Matteo said nothing. Ethan continued, "If Vincent is looking at that file now, he is not studying the past. He is preparing to use it." Matteo looked again at Lily, his daughter, no longer a suspicion, no longer a ghost possibility. His blood, his child, his second chance standing in the next room with purple crayon still under one fingernail. The truth had given her back to him. Now the truth had made her a target. Matteo closed his hand around the phone. "Then we prepare first," he said. Claire agreed to enter the Moretti estate, because fear had finally become less useful than caution. There was a difference, she told herself, as the black sedan moved through the iron gates. Fear made a woman run until she stopped thinking. Caution made her count exits, memorize faces, and keep her child's hand close without squeezing too hard. For 9 years, fear had kept Lily alive. Claire would never be ashamed of that. But fear had also taught Lily how to pack fast, how to stay quiet in motel hallways, how to read her mother's face before asking a question. A child should not have to become good at disappearing. So when Matteo told her Vincent had accessed her old death file, when Ethan Brooks confirmed someone had started digging through the lies built around Claire Whitmore's grave, she said yes to 3 days under Matteo's protection. 3 days, not a return, not forgiveness, not a promise, just 3 days. Lily sat beside her in the back seat, one hand pressed to the window as the estate came into view. The house stood at the end of a long drive lined with winter bare trees, old and broad and solemn, built from gray stone that looked as if it had survived storms, funerals, weddings, betrayals, and men who thought power could make them permanent. It was not flashy. No golden gates, no fountain shaped like an angel, no foolish display of wealth that somehow made it more intimidating. The house did not need to impress anyone. Like Matteo, it simply existed and expected the world to move around it. Is this where he lives? Lily whispered. Claire looked at the tall windows, the dark roof, the two men standing near the front steps, trying very hard not to look like guards. Yes, Lily considered that. It looks lonely. Claire's chest tightened. She wondered if children were born seeing the truth or if adults simply train themselves not to. The car stopped. Before the driver could open the door, Matteo stepped down from the front entrance and did it himself. Claire noticed the guards watching him. She noticed Nico standing near the left column, arms folded, eyes scanning everything except Lily directly. She noticed Matteo dismissing the men, with one look before they could crowd the car. Good, she thought. He remembered. No show of force. No wall of men around her daughter. No performance of protection that felt like ownership. Matteo opened Lily's door first, then stepped back to give her room. Welcome, Lily. Lily climbed out with her backpack hugged to her chest. Do I have to be quiet inside? Matteo looked at her, surprised. No, it looks like the kind of house where people whisper. A faint change touched his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough that Claire saw the man beneath the boss. People whisper here because they are afraid of my mother, he said. Lily's eyes widened. Your mom lives here? She does. Is she scary? Matteo glanced toward the front door where Rosa Moriarty had just appeared. Yes, he said, but usually for good reasons. Rosa stood straight in a dark dress, silver hair pinned perfectly, one hand resting on the doorframe as if she needed the house to hold her still. Claire had not seen her in 9 years. The last time, Rosa had been colder than winter, polite but watchful, a woman who loved her son enough to distrust anyone who might hurt him. Claire had expected a judgment now, maybe accusation, maybe the hard stare of a mother who had spent nearly a decade believing her son had been betrayed. But Rosa was not looking at Claire. She was looking at Lily. The old woman descended the steps slowly. For every step she took, Lily seemed to grow quieter. When Rosa reached her, she did not reach out. She lowered herself slightly, not all the way, just enough to meet Lily's eyes without towering. So, Rosa said, her voice rougher than she meant it to be, you are Lily. Lily nodded. Are you my grandma? Claire closed her eyes for half a second. Matteo turned his face away. Rosa's mouth trembled once, but she controlled it with the discipline of a woman who had spent her life refusing to fall apart in front of men. If you want me to be, Rosa said. Lily studied her face. I think I do. That was all it took. Rosa pulled the child into her arms with a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Lily stiffened for 1 second, then hugged her back. Claire stood beside the car. Feeling the strange ache of watching her daughter receive something Claire had never been able to give her. Family that did not require hiding. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish, old wood, coffee, and something warm from the kitchen. Lily looked everywhere. At the portraits on the walls, at the stair curving upward, at the large grandfather clock near the hall, at the bowl of oranges on a side table. Wealth did not impress her the way it might impress another child. She seemed more interested in signs of life. A half-read newspaper, a pair of reading glasses near Rosa's chair, a scratch on the floor where someone must have dragged furniture years before. Nico approached from the hallway, careful and stiff. Lily looked up at him. Are you one of the quiet people? Nico blinked. Claire nearly laughed despite herself. Matteo did not help him. Nico cleared his throat. Sometimes? Are you nice? He looked briefly at Matteo, as if no one ever asked him that, and he needed permission to answer. To children, Nico said. Lily nodded. That's important. Yes, Nico said quieter now. It is. Claire saw something shift in his face then. Not softness exactly, but recognition. Lily was not a bloodline, not leverage, not a security problem. She was a small girl in a yellow raincoat who asked direct questions and expected adults to answer like decent people. Rosa took Lily toward the kitchen for hot chocolate. leaving Claire alone in the front hall with Mateo. The silence between them changed immediately. Without Lily's voice, the past came closer. Claire looked at the staircase. I forgot how large this place was. You were only here twice. I remember both times. So do I. She did not look at him. If she did, she might remember too much. His hand at her back as they walked through this hall in secret, his voice low near her ear, telling her not to let the house scare her because stone was easier to face than people. She had laughed then. She had been young enough to believe laughter could change the temperature of a room. Mateo said, "There is something I should show you." Every instinct in Claire warned her to refuse, but his voice held no command, only weight. She followed him up the stairs and down a long corridor to a room at the far end. He opened the door and stepped aside. Claire entered slowly. The room was exactly as she remembered and nothing like she expected. Her books were still on the shelf. The blue scarf she once left here was folded on the armchair. A chipped white mug she had loved because it fit her hands perfectly sat on the desk, repaired with thin gold seams where it had broken. The curtains had been changed, but the quilt at the foot of the bed was the same. Claire stood in the doorway, unable to move. You kept it, she said. Yes, for 9 years? Yes. She turned to him. Why? Mateo's eyes moved over the room, not with pride, but with something closer to punishment. Because hating you was the only way I could keep missing you without losing my mind. The words entered her quietly. That made them worse. A dramatic confession could have been dismissed. A shouted apology could have been fought. But this was just truth, simple and worn down from years of being carried alone. Claire walked to the desk and touched the repaired mug. I did not leave because I stopped loving you, she said. I know that now. Knowing it now does not undo what happened. No, I am not coming back as your wife because a DNA test says you are Lily's father. I know. She turned around to face him fully. Do you? Because men like you are used to claiming things. Territory, loyalty, debts, people. His jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Lily is not an heir, Claire continued. She is not a Moretti symbol. She is not proof that you won back what was stolen from you. She is a little girl who likes purple crayons, library books, and pancakes with too much syrup. Mateo looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, She asked me if people whisper in this house. Claire had not expected that answer. He looked toward the hallway, where Lily's laughter floated faintly from downstairs. She is right, he said. They do. I do not want her learning to whisper. For the first time since entering the estate, Claire felt her fear loosen by a thread, not vanish, just loosen. Before she could answer, footsteps rushed down the hall. Lily appeared at the corner, breathless, Rosa behind her, calling for her not to run in socks. Mom, Lily said. There's a locked room with flowers on the door. Claire's body went cold. Mateo looked toward the far end of the hall. He knew exactly which room she meant. Lily, Claire said carefully, don't touch locked doors. I didn't. I only saw it. It has a little wooden thing on the wall but no name. Mateo went still. Rosa reached them, her face pale now. I forgot that door was still locked. Claire looked from Rosa to Mateo. What room? Mateo did not answer immediately. Then he walked past them, down the hall, and stopped before a white door with faded painted vines around the frame. He took a key from his pocket. Claire noticed his hand was not entirely steady. The door opened. The room beyond was dim, but enough light came from the hall to reveal pale yellow walls, a covered crib, a rocking chair, shelves with old children's books, and a wooden nameplate hanging unfinished above the crib. No name had been carved into it. Claire brought one hand to her mouth. She had never seen this room. Mateo stood at the threshold as if he could not step inside. I started it before the fire, he said. Claire stared at him. You didn't know I was pregnant. No. Then why? He looked at the crib, dust-covered, and waiting for a child who had grown 8 years somewhere else. Because I hoped one day you would be. Lily slipped her hand into Claire's. Was this for me? She asked. Mateo looked down at her. His face held grief, but he did not hide from her question. I didn't know it was you, he said. But yes. Lily considered that, then stepped into the nursery. She touched the covered crib gently, not with excitement, but with the strange care children show when they understand something is sad, even if they do not know all the reasons. It waited a long time, she said. No one knew what to say to that. Then Nico appeared at the end of the hall. He did not speak at first, and the look on his face pulled Matteo back into the present. Matteo stepped away from the nursery door. What is it? Nico's eyes flicked briefly toward Claire and Lily. Matteo's voice hardened. Say it. Nico held up a tablet. Someone accessed the temporary school schedule we arranged for Lily. From inside our security network, Rosa's hand tightened on the doorframe. Claire pulled Lily closer. Matteo did not move, but something in the air changed. The father in the nursery disappeared behind the man Chicago feared. Who? Matteo asked. We are tracing it. Claire looked at him. Inside your house? Nico said nothing. That was answer enough. For 9 years, Claire had believed running kept danger behind her. Now, standing in the house Matteo had once prepared for a child he never knew existed, she understood the harder truth. Running had not ended the danger, it had only postponed the day they would have to face it. Matteo turned to Claire. I will find who did this. Claire looked past him into the dusty nursery, then down at Lily. No, she said quietly. Matteo frowned. Claire lifted her eyes to his. We will. Vincent Caruso arrived at the Moretti estate at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, carrying a black leather gift box and the calm expression of a man who believed history belonged to whoever controlled the records. The sky over Chicago had darkened again, not with rain this time, but with the heavy, gray stillness that comes before it. From the upstairs window, Claire saw the Blacktown car stop at the front steps. She did not know the driver, but she knew the way the men near the entrance straightened. She knew the way Nico moved his hand closer to his jacket without actually touching it. She knew the Huzo seemed to hold its breath before Vincent even stepped out. That was the first thing that frightened her, not Vincent himself. The reaction of everyone who already knew what he was capable of. He looked older than the man from her nightmares. His hair had gone almost fully silver, and he walked with a polished wooden cane that Claire did not believe he truly needed. His suit was charcoal, his tie dark blue. His shoes shined so carefully, they reflected the pale winter light. He looked like a retired judge, or a university donor, or a man who sent handwritten thank you notes after expensive dinners. That was how Vincent had always survived. He wore respectability like armor. The monsters who looked like monsters were easy to avoid. The ones who spoke gently were the ones who got inside locked rooms. Claire stood back from the window before he could look up and see her. Lily sat on the rug near the bed, drawing with the new set of crayons Rosa had found in a kitchen drawer. She had spent the morning drawing the nursery, then crossing it out, then drawing it again with brighter colors. Children, Claire had learned, often healed by repeating what confused them till it became less frightening. Who is here? Lily asked without looking up. Claire kept her voice even. Someone your father knows. Lily paused at the word father. It was still new in the room, still careful. She did not use it all the time. Sometimes she said Mr. Matteo, sometimes she said him. Once that morning, when she thought no one was listening, she had whispered Dad to herself, just to see how it sounded. Is he nice? Lily asked. No. Lily looked up then. Claire crossed the room and knelt in front of her. That does not mean you need to be scared. It means you need to stay with Rosa until I come get you. No wandering, no opening doors, no answering questions from people you don't know. Lily nodded slowly. Like motel rules? Claire's heart twisted. Yes, but only for now. Lily touched her mother's face with one small hand. You look like before. Before what? Before we had to leave places. Claire pulled her into a hug. This time, we are not leaving because we are scared. If we leave, it will be because we choose to. She wanted that to be true. She needed it to be true, because if Vincent could still decide when she ran, then 9 years had taught her nothing except how to survive in circles. Downstairs, Vincent greeted Rosa first. My dear Rosa, he said, bowing slightly as he handed her the leather box. You look unchanged. Rosa took the box but did not open it. That is because I do not waste energy pretending to be kind to men I do not like. A faint smile touched Vincent's mouth. Still sharp. Still alive, Rosa said. Matteo stood at the far end of the foyer, one hand in his pocket, his expression unreadable. Nico was near the hall, silent and watchful. The security issue from the night before had not been solved yet. Someone inside the network had accessed Lily's temporary school schedule. And until Mateo knew who, every familiar face in the house had become a question. Vincent turned toward him. Mateo. Vincent. No embrace, no handshake, only names placed like weapons on a table. Vincent glanced toward the staircase. I hear the house has become full of surprises. Mateo did not move. You came to discuss surprises? I came to offer congratulations, then offer them and leave. Vincent sighed softly, as if disappointed by bad manners. Your father would have received an old friend with wine. My father is dead, and yet many of us still live by what he built. No, Mateo said. Some of us live off what he built. Rosa's eyes shifted to her son, but she said nothing. Vincent's smile remained, but something cold passed behind it. Perhaps we should speak privately. Mateo stood towards Speedy. After you. Claire watched from the upstairs hallway as the two men entered the study. She should have stayed away. She knew that. Mateo had told her Vincent was dangerous, and Claire did not need convincing. Her body remembered his voice outside Lily's nursery window. It remembered hiding in the dark while he spoke calmly into the phone and told her how beautiful her daughter was. But fear had stolen enough years from her. This time, she needed to know what the threat sounded like when it stopped pretending. She moved quietly down the back stairs, the route Rosa had shown her that morning, and stopped in the shadowed hallway outside the study door. Inside, Vincent spoke first. She has your eyes. Mateo's voice was flat. Do not speak about my daughter. Your daughter. Vincent let the words settle. How quickly the dead return with claims. She is not a claim. No, she is worse. She is an attachment. There was the soft sound of something being placed on wood. Claire edged closer. Vincent continued, a man like you can survive enemies. He can survive indictments. He can survive bullets, betrayal, and even grief. But a child? A child makes a man predictable. Mateo did not answer. Vincent said, I have no interest in harming the girl. That sentence is the reason men like you should never be believed. A dry chuckle, still dramatic when wounded. Then Vincent's voice changed. It lost the warmth. It became the voice Claire remembered. 3 shipping routes, he said. The Cicero construction front. The South Harbor security contract. You sign them over to my people by Friday. In return, I make sure no one outside this room learns that Mateo Moretti has a daughter. Mateo's reply came quietly. And if I refuse? Vincent paused. Claire could almost see him smile. Then every man who hates you learns where your heart lives. The hallway seemed to tilt beneath Claire's feet. That was the real threat. Not a gun, not a body on the floor exposure. Lily's name whispered into the wrong ears. Her school, her face, her connection to Mateo. A child turned into a map for revenge. Claire pressed one hand against the wall to steady herself. Inside the study, Mateo said, You were the one who made her run. Vincent did not deny it. I protected the family from weakness. You stole 9 years from me. I preserved your empire. You lied. I managed you, Vincent said, because someone had to. You were becoming soft over a schoolteacher with pretty eyes and foolish dreams. You were talking about cleaning accounts, cutting men loose, making enemies of people who had built your father's fortune. Claire would have turned you into a husband before you were done being a king. Mateo's voice dropped. Be very careful. No, Mateo. You be careful. You have one little girl sleeping under your roof, and suddenly you think restraint is wisdom. It is not. It is a leash. And if you do not hand me what I asked for, I will show you how many hands can pull it. Claire stepped away from the door before she heard more. Her legs felt unsteady, but her mind was clear in a way it had not been for years. Vincent had done this before. He had used her fear, Mateo's anger, and Lily's existence to move them like pieces. He expected the same move again, Claire running, Mateo raging, everyone reacting. Not this time. She found Mateo in the study 10 minutes after Vincent left. The room still seemed infected by him. The leather box sat unopened on the desk. Beside it were 3 photographs Vincent had left behind. Lily outside the church, Lily in the estate garden, Lily near the nursery window. Claire looked at them and felt something colder than fear move through her. Mateo stood by the fireplace, one hand braced on the mantel. He did not look at her. You heard. Yes. You should not have. You don't get to decide what truth I can survive anymore. That made him turn.
Wow.
For a moment they simply looked at each other. 9 years of running stood on one side of the room. 9 years of rage stood on the other. Between them lay 3 photographs of their daughter. Claire spoke first. My first instinct is to pack a bag. I know. To take Lily and disappear before sunset. I know that too. But that is what he wants, she said. He wants me afraid. You furious. And Lily hidden so deeply. She grows up thinking means escape routes. Mateo's expression shifted. Claire stepped closer to the desk and touched one of the photographs with 2 fingers. Running saved her when I was alone, she said. But I am not alone anymore, am I? Mateo looked at her for a long moment. No. Then we stopped letting him decide where we stand. Before he could answer, Nico entered with Ethan Brooks behind him. Ethan wore a federal agent's tired expression and a raincoat that had seen better days. He looked at Claire first, then Mateo. I assume Vincent made contact. Mateo nodded. Ethan placed a folder on the desk. Then we have a window. Extortion only helps us if we can prove it. Claire's testimony helps. The old files help. But if we want to bury Vincent legally, we need his financial channels, his forged records, and proof of the staged death. Nico's face hardened. You are asking Mateo to hand over family business. Ethan looked at him. I am asking him how much of the old life his daughter should have to inherit. The words landed heavily. Nico turned to Mateo. You built this family from ashes. Do not hand it to the government. Mateo looked at the photographs of Lily. For once, his answer did not come from pride. Then maybe, he said, I should have built something cleaner. That evening, the house changed rhythm. Men moved quietly. Phones were checked. Routes were adjusted. Mateo ordered Lily's school schedule canceled until further notice. Claire stayed with Lily in the sitting room while Rosa read aloud from an old children's book, her voice steady even as her fingers trembled slightly against the page. For 1 hour, nothing happened. That was how danger often worked. It gave people just enough silence to believe they had time. At 7:14, Nico received a false alert from the East Gate. At 7:17, Claire's phone rang with a call that appeared to come from the school administrator handling Lily's temporary enrollment. At 7:19, a woman in a navy coat arrived at the rear service entrance holding forged child welfare documents, claiming there was an emergency custody verification due to Lily's irregular birth records. At 7:23, Lily was gone, not dragged, not screaming, taken through paperwork, timing, and trust manipulated by people who knew exactly which fear to trigger. Claire found the sitting room empty except for Lily's purple crayon on the rug. For 1 second, she could not make sound. Then the phone on Mateo's desk rang. A video message appeared. Vincent sat in a dark room, calm as ever. Beside him, Lily sat in a chair, frightened but unharmed, clutching the stuffed rabbit from the church basement. Vincent smiled. Now, he said, we discuss power like civilized men. Mateo watched the screen. The old monster rose in his eyes. Claire saw it. She stepped in front of him, shaking but unbroken. If you become what he expects, she said, we lose her. Mateo closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the monster was still there. But now the father was holding its leash. For 10 seconds after Vincent's video ended, no one in the room moved. The screen had gone black, but Lily's frightened face still seemed to hang in the air. Claire could still see her daughter's small hands clutching the stuffed rabbit from the church basement. She could still hear Vincent's smooth voice saying, now we discuss power like civilized men, as if taking a child were only another business negotiation, another signature waiting to be forced. Mateo stood behind the desk, one hand flat against the wood. He was silent. That frightened Claire more than if he had shouted. Nico was already reaching for his phone. I'll get every crew moving. We blocked the river roads, the spruce. Private airfields, no, Claire said. Nico turned on her. He has your daughter. Our daughter, Mateo said. The room froze around those 2 words. Claire looked at him, and for one heartbeat, pain and fear gave way to something deeper. He had not said it to claim Lily. He had said it to remind every person in the room that this was not a mafia problem, not a territory problem, not a business dispute. It was a child. Claire took a shaky breath. If you flood the city to tea with men, Vincent will know. If he panics, he moves her. If he moves her, we may lose the only chance we have. Nico's jaw worked. So we sit here? No, Mateo said. His voice was calm now, almost too calm, we think. He replayed the video. Vincent appeared on the screen again, seated at a metal table in a dim room. Lily sat beside him, pale but unharmed. Behind them, the wall was stone or concrete, stained with moisture. Somewhere in the background, water dripped steadily. Mateo watched once, then again, then a third time. Claire could barely stand to look, but she forced herself. Fear wanted to make her close her eyes. Motherhood made her keep them open. On the fourth replay, Lily lifted her eyes toward the camera and said, very softly, Dad, I didn't tell him about Grandma's secret room. Nico muttered. Poor kid's scared. But Mateo's head turned slowly. Rosa, who had been standing near the fireplace with one hand pressed to her mouth, went still. Claire looked from Mateo to Rosa. What? Rosa whispered the wine cellar. Mateo rewound the video. Lily said it again. Grandma's secret room. Rosa stepped closer to the screen. This morning, while I was making her hot chocolate, I told her about the old wine cellar under the house. I said it was cold and smelled like wet stone and old wood. She asked if it was secret. I told her it was when Mateo was a boy. Claire grabbed the back of a chair. She's telling us where she is. Mateo's eyes stayed on the screen, on Lily's face, on the slight tremble of her mouth. His daughter had been taken by a man who weaponized fear, and still she had listened, observed, remembered, and given them a clue without Vincent understanding. For the first time since the video arrived, Mateo's expression shifted, not into rage, into pride. She is Claire's daughter, he said quietly. Claire almost broke at that. Ethan Brooks arrived 15 minutes later, with rain on his coat and a federal case file under one arm. He did not waste time with sympathy, which Claire appreciated. Sympathy could come later. Right now, she needed competence. Mateo played the video. Ethan watched it twice, then looked at Nico. Old wine storage sites, river district, stone walls, damp, wood interior, close enough for Vincent to reach without crossing too many cameras. Nico was already typing. Caruso family owned 3 properties like that. 2 sold. 1 under a shell company near the river. Address, Ethan said. Nico gave it. Ethan's mouth tightened. That building is scheduled for demolition next month. Low traffic, bad cell coverage. Good place to hold someone temporarily. Claire looked at Mateo. That's where she is. Mateo did not answer right away. He was reading Vincent's message that had come with the video. Midnight. Alone. Bring signed transfer documents. If I see police, she disappears. If I see your men, she disappears. If you try to be clever, she disappears. Nico looked at Mateo. We can hit the building before midnight. And if Lily is not in the main room, Ethan said. If there's a second location, a dead man signal, a watcher outside, you go in loud, she becomes the first thing they move. Nico glared at him. You have a better idea, Fed? Yes, Ethan said. We build a legal one fast and a tactical one quietly. Mateo looked at him. Say it. Ethan placed the file on the desk. Vincent wants you alone because he wants control and deniability. You go. You keep him talking. You get him to repeat the demand. You get him to get Lily to the transfer. Meanwhile, my team moves under warrant authority based on the kidnapping video, Claire's testimony, and the extortion demand. Nico laughed once, bitterly. Warrant authority. This is a child, not a parking ticket. Ethan's eyes hardened. And if you turn it into a street war, every charge becomes harder to prove. Every body becomes another excuse for Vincent's lawyers, and the child gets caught between men trying to prove who loves her more violently. The room went silent. Claire looked at Ethan then, really looked at him. She had spent years thinking law was something powerful men avoided and frightened women could not reach in time. But here was a man saying sing she needed everyone to hear. Justice was not weakness. Restraint was not surrender. Sometimes the smartest move was not the loudest one. Mateo opened a drawer in his desk and removed a drive. Nico's face changed. What is that? Records. What records? Vincent's channels, the forged accounts, the shell companies tied to the staged death, payments to the men who moved Claire. Ethan held out his hand. Mateo did not give him the drive immediately. There is more on here than Vincent, Mateo said. Ethan understood. Your operations too? Enough to damage me. Nico stepped forward. No. Mateo did not look at him. Nico's voice rose. No, Mateo. You hand that over, they freeze accounts, seize properties, pull licenses. Men who stayed loyal scatter. Enemies will smell blood. You will destroy everything you built. Mateo finally turned. I built a house my daughter had to be protected from. Nico flinched, as if struck. Mateo placed the drive in Ethan's hand. No, he said quietly. I am trading the part of my life that made her unsafe. Claire stared at him. For 9 years, she had believed Mateo's world could only take peace, take safety, take choices. But here he was, giving up power not because someone forced him, not because he was weak, but because Lily's future mattered more than the empire that had failed to protect any of them. At 11:42 that night, Mateo arrived at the abandoned warehouse near the river alone. At least, that was what Vincent saw. The building stood between two empty lots, its brick walls dark with moisture, broken windows boarded from the inside. The river moved black and slow behind it. Wind carried the smell of oil, wet wood, and rust. Mateo wore no visible weapon. The transfer documents were in a leather folder under his arm. Inside, Vincent waited beneath a hanging industrial light. He smiled when Mateo entered. You came. You have my daughter. Sentiment has made you punctual. Mateo walked forward, stopping 10 feet from him. Where is she? Safe. If she were safe, she would be with her mother. Vincent gave a small sigh. Still romantic after all this pain. Claire always did bring out the worst in you. No, Mateo said. You did. Vincent's smile thinned. In a van 2 blocks away, Ethan listened through a concealed transmitter sewn into Mateo's coat. Beside him, Claire wore headphones, both hands locked together so tightly her nails marked her skin. Rosa sat beside her, praying under her breath. Nico was with a small team near the rear access point, furious at the plan but loyal enough to follow it exactly. On the warehouse floor, Vincent gestured toward the folder. Put them on the table. Let me see, Lily. You do not negotiate from strength tonight. I am not negotiating. Vincent laughed softly. No? Then what are you doing? Mateo looked directly at him. Giving you one chance to say out loud what you did. Vincent's face cooled. You still think this is about truth? Truth is what men call a story, after they have enough power to make others repeat it. And Claire? A necessary correction. My child? Leverage, Vincent said. Do not pretend you would not understand the concept if she belonged to another man. In the van, Ethan lifted one hand. That was enough. Claire shut her eyes, tears slipping free despite her effort to hold them back. Mateo's voice remained controlled. You staged Claire's death. I preserved your usefulness. You threatened her while she was pregnant. I removed a distraction. You took my daughter tonight. I took your weakness. Mateo stepped closer. No, he said. You revealed yours. Before Vincent could respond, the warehouse lights flickered. Somewhere below, a door opened. Claire's voice came through a small speaker Ethan's team had patched into the old building system. Lily, baby, listen to me. Follow my voice. Down in a storage room that smelled of damp stone and old barrels, Lily lifted her head. Her hands were shaking, but she was not frozen. Her mother had taught her many things she should never have had to learn. How to hide, how to stay quiet, how to look for exits, how to use the little metal hairpin tucked inside her sleeve if a door had an old latch. She had already loosened the vent cover. Now she heard Claire. Follow my voice, sweetheart. You are not alone. Lily crawled. Above, Vincent realized something had changed. His hand moved toward his coat. Mateo moved faster, not for a weapon, but to knock the table sideways between them. At the same instant, Ethan's team breached the side entrance and Nico's men secured the rear, not firing wildly, not storming like gangsters, but moving with hard, controlled precision. Vincent pulled a gun anyway. He aimed it at Mateo. You were stronger when you had no one, Vincent snarled. Mateo stood still. Blood thundered in his ears, but his mind was clear. No, he said, I was easier to use. The federal agents entered with weapons raised. Drop it. For one terrible second, Vincent looked like he might shoot. Then a side door burst open and Lily stumbled out, coughing, hair tangled, stuffed rabbit clutched under one arm. Dad! The words split the room. Mateo turned toward her. One of Vincent's men, half hidden near the stairwell, lunged for the child. Mateo moved without thinking. He crossed the space between them and put his body in front of Lily, just as the man fired. The shot cracked through the warehouse. Claire screamed through the radio. Mateo staggered as the bullet tore across his shoulder, but he did not fall. Nico tackled the shooter. Eason agents swarmed Vincent. The gun clattered to the floor, and Mateo, bleeding, turned fully toward Lily. He did not reach for a weapon, he did not order anyone killed. He dropped to one knee and pulled his daughter behind him with his good arm. Lily threw herself against him. "You came," she sobbed. Mateo held her carefully, his blood staining the sleeve of her coat. "I told you I would." Claire reached them moments later, running across the warehouse floor with all the years of fear breaking behind her. She fell to her knees and wrapped Lily in her arms, one hand reaching for Mateo without seeming to decide to do it. For a moment, the three of them stayed there together, amid the shouting, the sirens, and the cold warehouse air. Vincent Caruso was dragged past them in handcuffs. He looked at Mateo, expecting rage. Instead, Mateo looked down at Lily. That was when Vincent understood he had lost. Not because Mateo had become weaker, because Mateo had finally found something stronger than revenge. Vincent Caruso did not look like a man who had lost when they brought him into the federal courthouse 3 weeks later. He wore a dark suit, his silver hair combed neatly back, his hands folded in front of him as if the handcuffs were only a temporary inconvenience. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, hungry for the story of the woman who had come back from the dead and the child who had exposed a mafia war with one innocent sentence. Claire hated every camera. She hated the headlines even more. They called her a ghost, a runaway wife, a secret bride, the dead woman with a daughter. None of them knew what it meant to wake up for 9 years, wondering if that would be the day the lie found you again. Mateo arrived separately, not because he wanted distance, but because Ethan Brooks had advised it. The case had to be clean. No appearance of intimidation, no Moretti men filling the courtroom, no silent threats in tailored suits. So Mateo came with one lawyer, one federal escort, and his arm still in a sling from the gunshot wound he had taken for Lily. When he saw Claire near the witness room, he did not touch her. He only asked, "Are you ready?" Claire looked through the small window at Vincent sitting at the defense table. "No," she said. Then she lifted her chin. "But I am done being silent." When Claire took the stand, the courtroom changed. Even Vincent's attorney softened his voice at first, as if gentleness might make his questions less cruel. Claire gave her name, her old name, and the name she had used to keep her daughter alive. She spoke of the pregnancy, the threats, the staged fire, the dead woman used in her place, and the phone call outside Lily's nursery when Vincent proved he could find them anywhere. She did not weep. That made it stronger. Every word landed cleanly, not polished, not dramatic, just true. Then Vincent's attorney stood and tried to turn survival into suspicion. He asked why she had never contacted the police. He asked why she had changed names. He asked why she expected the court to believe a woman would vanish for 9 years without some guilt of her own. Finally, he leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, are you asking this jury to believe that you disappeared for nearly a decade out of love?" Claire looked toward the back row where Lily sat between Rosa and Father Daniel. Lily's hands were folded in her lap, her face serious, brave in the way children should never have to be brave. Claire turned back to the attorney. "No," she said. "I am asking them to believe a mother will do what she thinks she must to keep her child breathing." The room went silent. After that, the case no longer belonged to Vincent Hens' version of events. Ethan presented records from the drive Mateo had surrendered, payments, forged reports, shell companies, private security logs, and the financial trail Vincent had used to build the lie. Those records did more than condemn Vincent. They also exposed pieces of Mateo's own empire. Accounts were frozen, contracts were seized. Men who once called Mateo's family stopped answering his calls. Nico took it hardest. In a courthouse hallway, he said, "We losing territory." Mateo looked through the glass at Lily, who had fallen asleep against Rosa's shoulder. "Good," he said quietly. "Maybe she'll gain a childhood." Vincent was found guilty on multiple counts: kidnapping, extortion, evidence tampering, conspiracy, and the crimes tied to Claire's staged death. When the verdict was read, he did not shout. He only looked at Mateo with hatred cold enough to last a lifetime. Mateo did not smile. Justice did not give back 9 years. It did not erase motel rooms, false names, or the little girl who had learned escape routes before multiplication tables. It only stopped the lie from taking more. Outside the courthouse, Claire stood beside Mateo while reporters shouted questions from behind barricades. For the first time, she did not hide her face. She held Lily's hand, and Lily held Mateo's with the careful confidence of a child still learning that he would not disappear. Claire looked at him and said, "I can go back to being your wife, just because the truth finally caught up with us." Mateo nodded. "I know. I may still love you," she said, her voice quieter. "But love does not erase fear overnight." "No," he said. "It earns its way through it." Claire studied him, seeing not the man she had run from and not the man she had married, but someone standing between both, trying to become worthy of the life he had been given back. "Then start with Lily," she said. Mateo looked down as Lily pressed a folded drawing into his hand. He opened it and saw a small house, 3 people at a kitchen table and pancakes stacked too high in the middle. Underneath, in Lily's uneven writing, were 2 words. "Maybe home." Mateo folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside his jacket over his heart. "For now," he said, "that is more than enough." 6 months later, Claire no longer checked the window every 10 minutes. She still checked it sometimes. Healing did not arrive all at once, and it did not erase old habits just because the danger had a name, a verdict, and a prison number. Some nights, she still woke before dawn, with her heart racing, listening for footsteps that were not there. Some mornings, she still reached beneath her shirt for the ring, before remembering it was not hidden there anymore. But the fear had changed. It no longer stood in the middle of her life giving orders. It lived at the edge now, quieter, watched, no longer allowed to decide everything. She and Lily lived in a small house 3 blocks from Lily's new school. It had blue shutters, a narrow porch, and a kitchen with one window that faced a maple tree. It was not the Moretti estate. Claire had chosen that on purpose. Lily needed a home, not a fortress. She needed neighbors who waved from driveways, a school bus stop, a library card, and a bedroom where her drawings could stay taped to the wall without being packed into a suitcase by morning. Every Thursday evening, Mateo came for dinner. At first, he arrived too formally, like a man attending a negotiation. Dark suit, polished shoes, a careful knock, though Lily had already told him he could just ring the bell. He brought flowers once, and Claire told him gently that this was not a date. The next week, he brought pancake mix for Lily, which was worse because he had no idea how to use it. By the 3rd week, Lily had taken charge. "You stir too hard," she told him, standing on a kitchen stool with a wooden spoon in hand. "Pancakes are not enemies." Mateo looked at Claire over Lily's head. Claire did not help him. "She is right," Claire said. "You do attack the batter." Mateo looked down into the bowl. "I am learning," and he was, slowly, badly sometimes. But honestly, he learned that Lily hated peas but would eat carrots if they were cut into circles. He learned that she asked serious questions at bedtime because darkness made her brave. He learned that school concerts mattered even when the singing was terrible. He learned that a child did not need grand promises nearly as much as she needed someone to show up when they said they would. He never missed a Thursday, not once. His life outside that small house remained complicated. The Moretti empire had shrunk. Several businesses had been seized. Men who once praised his strength now whispered that fatherhood had weakened him. Nico still hated the losses, though even he had stopped calling them mistakes. The world Mateo had built did not collapse, but it changed shape. Some doors closed. The ones opened slowly. One evening, after dinner, Lily placed 2 silver rings on the kitchen table. Claire's breath caught. Mateo looked at the rings, then at Claire. Lily had found Claire's on the dresser, and Mateo's resting beside his watch while he washed dishes. She set them side by side under the warm kitchen light. "They match," Lily said. "Yes," Claire answered. "If they match," Lily asked, "does that mean you still love each other?" The room became very quiet. Claire looked at Mateo. There was no fear in his face now, only patience. That was new. Once Mateo had wanted answers the way powerful men wanted property quickly, completely, without delay. Now he waited because he understood some answers had to choose their own time. Claire touched her ring. "It means we made a promise once," she said. Mateo looked at the engraving inside his band. And broke less of it than we thought, he added. Lily thought that over with the serious expression she used for math homework and moral questions. Can people make the same promise again? Claire did not answer right away. Neither did Mateo, because the question deserved honesty, not comfort. Later, after Lily was asleep, Claire walked Mateo to the porch. The night was cool, and the maple leaves moved softly in the dark. For a moment they stood side by side, not touching, not hiding, not running. Claire took her ring from her pocket. Mateo's face tightened slightly, as if he thought she was giving it back. Instead, she slid it onto her finger. The silver looked older now. So did they, but it still fit. I don't want to hide it anymore, she said. Mateo's voice was low. Are you sure? Claire looked through the window at Lilia's drawings on the refrigerator, a church, a house, 3 people at a table, 2 rings, a yellow raincoat, pancakes drawn much too large. No, she said, but I am done letting fear make every decision. Mateo nodded once. He did not reach for her. He did not turn the moment into a claim. He simply stood there and let her choice belong to her. From inside, Lily's sleepy voice called, Dad? Mateo turned immediately. Claire saw it the way the word still reached him like a miracle. Lily opened the door a crack. Are you coming back next Thursday? Mateo looked at Claire, then back at his daughter. I wouldn't miss it. Lily smiled. Good. Mom burns pancakes. She's nervous. Claire laughed up before she could stop herself. Not a broken laugh. Not a frightened one, a real one. And Mateo smiled too. The most feared man in Chicago had survived bullets, betrayal, prison threats, and war. But the thing that finally brought him to his knees was not an enemy. It was a little girl in a church, pointing at his ring and giving him back the life he thought had burned to ash. That night, as Mateo walked down the porch steps, Claire did not feel the old urge to run. She stood in the doorway with the ring on her finger, her daughter safe behind her, and watched him leave knowing he would return. For now, that was enough. And for the first time in 9 years, enough felt like peace. This book is a work of imagination. Names, characters, places, and incidents either are products of the author's creativity or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons or actual events is unintentional and should not be construed as factual representation.
This story is not only about a mafia boss, a hidden daughter, or a silver ring. At its heart, it is a story about truth, restraint, and the kind of strength that cannot be bought with money or protected by power. Matteo Moretti was one of the most feared men in Chicago. He had influence, loyalty, wealth, and enemies who were afraid to speak his name too loudly. But for 9 years, he lived with a lie. He believed the woman he loved had betrayed him. He believed anger was proof of strength. He believed that if he stayed cold enough, no one could ever hurt him again. Then one little girl changed everything with one innocent sentence. Sir, my mom has a ring just like yours. That moment teaches us a powerful lesson. Sometimes the truth does not arrive loudly. It does not always come through revenge, violence, or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes truth comes through the voice of someone innocent enough to say what everyone else has been hiding. The deeper moral of this story is that anger can make even a powerful man blind. Matteo was intelligent, disciplined, and feared by many people, but pain made him stop asking questions. He accepted the lie because the lie gave his grief a target. That is something many people experience in real life. When we are hurt, we often want someone to blame more than we want the full truth. Claire's journey teaches another lesson. True strength is not always loud. She did not fight with weapons. She did not have an army. But she protected her daughter for 9 years with patience, sacrifice, and courage. Her strength was quiet, but it was real. She reminds us that survival is not weakness. Sometimes staying alive, raising a child, and refusing to give up is the bravest battle of all. Lily represents innocence, but also wisdom. She notices what adults ignore. She sees the ring. She sees sadness. She asks simple questions that expose complicated lies. Through her, the story reminds us that children often understand emotional truth before adults are brave enough to admit it. The greatest transformation belongs to Matteo. He could have chosen revenge. He could have destroyed Vincent the old way. But he chose evidence, law, sacrifice, and protection. That is where he becomes truly powerful. Not when people fear him, but when he controls himself. The message of this story is clear. Real power is not domination. Real power is restraint. Real love is not possession. Real love respects boundaries. And real redemption begins when a person is willing to lose power in order to protect what is innocent. In the end, the ring is not just a symbol of romance. It is a symbol of truth surviving fear, love surviving silence, and a broken family choosing to heal one honest step at a time.